Welcome, adventurers, storytellers, fellow D&D players. Putting together this kind of tutorial on how to use AI tools to either create or mature, flesh out your campaign or some of your concept ideas, turn it into a campaign, an adventure, whatever your goals are, and just showing you how AI tools can be leveraged to help you achieve those campaigns or bringing those ideas to fruition. So this isn't going to cover all like the political or ethical discussions about AI. AI is here; it's here to stay. Um, it's it's only there to benefit you. It's not going to replace a creative DM or creative writer, but you should be looking at AI or Copilot and the tools that we're going to discuss today as something that's just going to give you everything you want from like a few sentences sent into it. I'm sure you could get something out of it, but your adventure is always going to fall flat. Anything you're coming up with is going to fall flat um, if you have that expectation going into using AI tools. Um, I use this a lot in my day to day at work. I do IT for a living, but I use this also weekly in our D&D campaign for Fantasia, really to help flesh out ideas that kind of bounce them off of a third party. Um, the big thing is that it really can help you kind of explore ideas or question some of the things that you assumptions you've made in your writing. And it's essentially like having a whole board or room of writers to kind of bounce these off of and help you improve your writing. Published literature, different works of art, or fiction. They have writers, publishers, editors, all these things that kind of help you get that finalized product. And you know, the readers of whatever you push out or the audience members, they don't really care how many times the story was edited, re-edited, how you did all that research to get to where you want to be. Your audience cares about your finished product, whether or not it makes sense, and things like that. So this series, we're going to go over a couple of things. I think this streaming session, I'm just going to go over a few of the bullet points, such as like what tools I use. And I plan on going over only free tools. Some of them you can pay for, but most of them will do the same thing. Um, and unless you're getting like a special AI, dedicated to your topic, context is always going to be a big important thing. So, what I kind of want to talk about, or what I plan to talk about in this whole series, though, is we're going to go over a couple of different areas. This is going to cover, setting the stage, understanding the importance of context, and how to set up your campaign's foundation. Brainstorming, researching different things that you want to try to include in your campaign, or kind of like dig into to see if you can use them in your campaign. How to develop the plot, structure your campaign storyline, create NPCs and factions, designing locations and encounters, integrating mechanics and items, refining and polishing the output that you get from Copilot and other AI tools. Excuse me. And also just some final thoughts and tips on the AI tools themselves and how you can use them, which we'll probably cover just naturally through the progression of the series. Um, so the first thing I want to talk about is the context. I've mentioned it maybe once or twice already, but when you use any AI tool, it's super important to provide it information that it may not already have. That also means resetting the stage from time to time to start a new conversation. So what I mean by that is if you ask AI, for example, what is a 4x4? It could say it's 16, it's a piece of lumber, it's all-wheel drive truck, and all those answers are correct. But as you see, without context about what you're actually talking about, it's just doing its best efforts. It kind of goes with asking questions. If you ask super generic or broad questions, it's going to do its best to give you something as close to what you're looking for, and it's not necessarily wrong, but it can fall flat. And that's where I hear a lot of feedback about using AI tools. It just they seem to fall flat in what you're asking or what you're trying to accomplish. So I'm really hoping that going into this series and in this video focusing on context and research will really kind of help clear that kind of stuff up. So, just a quick tour of Copilot. Again, you use ChatGPT. There's a whatever free AI source you have. They're all going to do relatively the same thing. They're all going to have the same requirements of context. So, these lessons or things will go translate to any product really you're using. Following Copilot, a few things I like to point out is that there's these different modes like creative, balanced, precise. If I'm doing fictional kind of creative work or things where we're trying to come up with new things, I typically stick with creative. I have done balanced before, but really for writing, creative writing, I'll use creative. Now, my day-to-day work stuff with IT, I'll use balanced and precise. And if I will say, like, if you have any kind of feel a certain way about it, the way I look at it, using AI is supposed to enhance and improve what you do. It's not supposed to replace your critical thinking. So, you a human element is always involved to the sense that, like, hey, is this output good for me to kind of use, or does this make sense against all the other things I've created with? Again, your boss or your audience is not going to care how many times you Google search something. They want to know, hey, did you get this done? Is it fully fleshed out? Is it safe or secure? Um, and that's that critical thinking, that critical eye that you have to apply when you're using these AI tools. Um, but anyways, back to the Copilot. You have creative, balanced, and precise. And it's worth mentioning that these conversations are capped at 30 messages each. Um, I think that's a good range because once you get past that, ChatGPT didn't used to have a range like that. I'm not sure if it still does. It's been a minute since I used the product, but once you get past a certain point, the AI can do fine, but I've ran into things where it's starting to trip over itself. So what I recommend is having threads created based on specific topics that you can kind of build off of and keep asking contextual questions. Um, that way you stay focused, and then you can kind of take that information and summarize it as you prepare other conversations. And you'll see that. So this is I create topics, and then you can explore your topics here. And you can see some of the stuff I've kind of looked up for for Fantasia. For example, like how does dim light and nighttime work in D&D? Just, I this is so great. I use this for running a game, asking rule questions, even rules that are a little bit more ambiguous or undefined. Anyways, I asked our D&D group to share an idea for this tutorial because I wanted something that I had no ideas for going into it. I wanted to kind of be something like a blank canvas, but I also wanted something that was unique. And what one of our players recommended was a campaign that was low magic, apocalyptic setting in the modern day past, 1800s, city factions fighting over resources. Now we're gonna go over stuff here, and I've actually already got started, and I just now realized that it says 1800s, not 18th century. So mine technically takes place in 1700s. So I still think it captures what we're trying to do here in this tutorial series. So no biggie. This is just some loose structuring on my document. I'll probably change this completely. Once I start plugging information in from my research, but it's enough for me to kind of know what I'm initially looking for. I need to figure out, what is that cataclysmic change that happened? What's the impact to the world of current setting? It could be anything from travel, economics, how different cities still interact or engage with each other, or are they live in more isolation type cultures now that the world has kind of gone to heck? Possibly some ideologies, central tension, just things like that. These are the kind of things that you need, and there's way more that you need, but I just start outlining some loose stuff. But low magic, we're going to stick probably with D&D 5e. Copilot does support other rule sets, but that's the one I'm most familiar with. I only play D&D, and that's Nothing against any of the other ones. I just have very limited time to spend on these hobbies, so I kind of stick with what I know. So, I've already done some search. So, going into this whole idea of this 18th century post-apocalyptic campaign setting, I haven't been in a history class for a minute. So, I besides the American Revolution, I don't really recall too much about the time period without some digging into. I could Google this all and do all that kind of extra work, but I kind of wanted to show you how I went through about doing this research. And the reason this research is important, and if you already know your content and everything, or what you're writing about, you're in great shape to go ahead and kick off to context. But for someone like me that is not that versed in 18th century history, or at least not anymore, it's been a while. You can't ask good questions without knowing what you're writing about. I'm not saying you have to be an expert on the topic, but you just can't come up with good context questions without knowing about what you're writing. Um, for From a D&D perspective, it's hard to create a campaign and D&D mechanics and adventures if you don't know how to run a DM like or run a D&D game. So this tutorial is not really going to go over how to be a DM and how to run a D&D session. It's more so about creating the story, the lore, the adventures, the mechanics of those adventures. But nothing's going to replace experience from being a DM. Again, that's that critical eye, critical mindset, critical thinking that comes into play when you're using any kind of AI program. Humans are necessary in almost every aspect of this so far. It helps do a lot of the heavy lifting, but you need that human element at all times. So we're going to go over some of the 18th century overview. I just want to show how you can use this tool to do some research. So at the very beginning here, it's going to take a second for it to spawn. Again, I don't really recall everything besides like American Revolution, so I just want to start at the top. I was like, hey, give me an overview of world history in 18th century. It tells me about the intellectual movement of the Enlightenment period, American French Revolution, technology advancements. Doesn't really go into details, but it gives me some stuff about the technology advancements at that time, such as steam engines, mechanized textile production. Doesn't really tell me about military strength, which is something I'm going to need to come up with some ideas for apocalypse. In 18th century, we don't have nukes and things like that to talk about, so I, I think a human-made apocalypse will be a little challenged. We could get a little creative with like maybe some pseudoscience stuff, but we're probably looking at natural disasters or a series of unfortunate events that have kind of I don't know, I guess, compounded upon one another, leading to this kind of apocalyptic scenario. But I haven't gotten that far. We're still doing research. It talks about colonial expansion, cultural developments. So the next thing I ask is like, okay, tell me how the Enlightenment era changed the world during this time period, cultural significance, impact of world leadership, overall impact of the world. And there you go. It's just breaking it all down, just summarizing it all for me. We won't have to read every one of these, but it's essentially it was a era of new philosophy, literature, art that kind of spoke to individualism, freedom, and a lot of these things that led to democratic ideals and the American Revolution. Also started talks about secular governments, the separation between church and state, human rights, and all those things. So right off the get go, this inspires so many ideas. Maybe not for the entire campaign, but I have so many ideas already just from reading that. Like, okay, we could definitely have a faction, for example, who prides in this post-apocalyptic world that is, main goal and focus is to collect knowledge, maintain it, curate it. Maybe they're trying to still push for changes into the government. What government remains after the apocalyptic events? Maybe there's a fight for power between the remaining governments that are left in the world and these more uh, scholastic type groups of people. So yeah, lots of ideas just from that piece of information from 18th century. Here I asked for some more information on like what technology advancements came from the 18th century. specifically to culture, world leadership, military strength. It talks about how all this stuff increased the ability to travel and produce certain materials, creating stronger and durable, like steel and iron, so that you can make better weapons. Impact to urbanization, people moving closer into the city for work, colonial expansion. You have movements advocating democracy in various parts of the world, advanced weaponry, and industrial warfare. This is now with some industrial nations like Britain was able to mass produce weapons and allowing them to fight at a global level rather than like specific theaters of war. And then I was like, okay, well, that's kind of generic. What kind of military advancements? So yeah, because I'm trying to look for some ideas of how potentially a human cost post like, apocalyptic scenario could happen. And so like it breaks down like the certain things that really came to be in the 18th century. Like the big one here is, moving from or I'm sorry, with the flintlock muskets, faster reload. Rather than earlier matchlock muskets, rifles started doing rifling in the barrels, giving the guns more accuracy. Cannons, howitzers, mortars, warships, professional armies, cavalry, rather than like militia and different things that you have more developed military strengths. This thing can lead to culture, which means that the armies became more structured and militarized. So maybe we have a faction in our new campaign setting where the remnants of the remaining warriors have kind of grouped up to kind of take over. Um, you know, Try to vie for power with whatever remains from the government. Maybe they're at odds with the scholars and those that are seeking enlightenment and moving the world in a new direction in this kind of wake of chaos. Maybe that puts them at odds with the armies that kind of held more to conservative or traditional values of their former nation's glory. Maybe there's yeah. So there's just some ideas that come to my head just from this research, where I just entering this research stage. I also there wasn't a whole lot of significant events in that they would share besides the revolution. So I said, give me some significant world events in the 18th century. Breaks down the Great Northern War for Russia, 7 Years' War, the Industrial Revolution, the Napoleon's rise to power. Again, bunch of great ideas right there to introduce the campaign at some level. Maybe not directly, maybe long term for your campaign. But instead of focusing on one city, maybe you want to start your campaign focusing on one city. It's good to know what's going on in the world outside of your campaign. Either for when you complete your current adventure and you want to expand the campaign further, and if the players like your setting and time period, maybe they want to explore it further. Here's some great inspiration. Like what was Russia doing during this time frame? What was Boston like during this time period while things are going to hell in London? Uh, Stuff like that. And here's some ideas for living a post-apocalyptic world. The 7 Years' War was like considered the First World War. Um, so what would happen if the 7 Years' War never really ended? Like maybe that's um, attributing factor to the reason we're in this post-apocalyptic setting. It's the war kept going. So there was civil unrest and riots. There was disease and famine because of lack of resources to keep the war going. Lots of deaths caused of the war, but also because of those other contributing factors that compounded. And also, here's an idea: like I like to keep fictional settings a little bit away from specific people. Kind of gives me a little bit more artistic license. But here's a great idea for a possible antagonist. Like maybe we could create a dictator or someone that's trying to rise to power, like Napoleon Bonaparte, and see that could be a great concept character to kind of use and build out. Someone that's maybe trying to seize power and unite all the factions to fight under his name, uh, but maybe his platform is good, but his means is not so good. So just an idea. I also like to look at literature or movies, but I watch more movies than reading, so uh, it helps you just inspire different ideas. So like here's a bunch of movies about Amadeus, The Madness of King George, The Duchess, um, Last of the Mohicans, great movie. Uh, the Patriot, great movie, and all these other pieces. So I'm familiar with a few of these movies. You can talk about there's a nice idea of a mental decline of King George. Maybe there's a bad king that's in our campaign. I don't know. That would be a great inspiration right there. I love these kind of movies or TV series. I'm not so certain I've seen The Duchess before, but if you haven't seen any kind of these period pieces like Bridgerton or Downton Abbey, um, I highly recommend it. They're really great uh, insight into how culture and society was back in the day. It was very hard to move through middle class, lower class, upper class. It kind of really captures the oppression on women and lack of women's rights, gender roles during these time periods. It all helps to kind of create more plausible characters and NPCs in your world setting. Last of the Mohicans about the Native Americans in the French and Indian War. Um, I believe that and the Patriots talks about that's the about the whole American Revolution, and there's a character for that, and I think he fought in the French Indian War or some other war prior to the Revolution. I don't recall. Don't quote me on that. But that's a great perspective on just not only like the clothes that they wore, but in how they acted, and a sense of duty that these people had in this time period. It also shows you, this is a great way of showing how your NPCs, examples of NPCs with past war experience and trauma. And I don't want to spend a horrible long time about going into each one of these, but I just want to really what I'm trying to do here is just highlight that I went from not knowing anything about 18th century, well, not knowing anything, but I went from basically very novice or knowledge of the 18th century, and just by asking these kind of iterative questions and digging into each one, like based on what was given back, and going into the next layer, asking specific questions, you start to kind of learn more and get inspired for potential ideas for your campaign. Again, and without this contextual information or this research, there's no way for me to give good questions to kind of inspire my campaign. And I'll kind of highlight that in the next conversations. But this is really just about a history overview. This conversation thread. So this is about how different groups treated each other. I kind of covered that with the gender roles, class hierarchies, colonialism, slavery, moral standards, politeness and manners, civil liberties, oppression, monarchs, resistance to change, constitutional monarchies such as like Parliament being implemented, and art and literature, because that could be part of that whole maybe that faction. It's not just science and writing or science and education. Maybe it's preserving art and major masterpieces that were developed during this time period that led to the disassembly of the world they knew it at that time. Oh, here perfectly. So then also after I was done kind of researching, not done. You're never really quite done. I mean, I went and said, hey, summarize our entire discussion here. And it did. It kind of broke it out down, bullet points, showing me the different things. Um, Now that I'm thinking about it, it might have been quicker for me to just go through this list. But yeah, it did that. Everything we kind of talked about, it broke it all down. I still had some more questions, like 7 Year War, because I really like that idea of possibly using that as a catalyst for the this apocalyptic scenario. So I just wanted to see what was more about. Like, what were the theaters of war? Who were the allies? Who were the enemies? Great Britain and Prussia were allies, and then France, Russia, Spain, Austria were allies, and um, or at least enemies to maybe Britain. Um, Territorial disputes. What caused it? Colonial rivalries, diplomatic revolution. What happens to the colonies at a large scale when the war has gone too long, disease, famine, and everything else associated with it. kind of wipes out a lot of the resources that you can keep from keeping a global war going on. Maybe there's something to explore there. Maybe they impact your main setting because of XYZ reasons. We'll kind of flesh those out as we get going. Um, asked about, because I was saying this before. It's important to know what else was maybe going on in the world. Even if your campaign's only set around one city or one region, it's helpful to know what's going on in the world, because maybe there's outside influences that affect your current setting, such as you know maybe you have ambassadors come, or some kind of event happen that put extra pressure on certain, or limitations on certain resources that were once available to your city. Maybe you complete the immediate campaign, but to find out the big bad was trying to prepare yourself for a bigger threat, which is other world powers that maybe were outside of your character's initial scope. It's just nice to keep these things in your back pocket to build upon. Let's see here. I just did some research on like when communism come over Russia. I wasn't sure when the monarchy kind of fell apart. Not nowhere near our 18th century, so it's kind of useless. But again, this is research. I don't, asking things I don't know, asking iteratively questions, building upon different concepts that is spent back to me. This is really important. And this is how AI helps you. And this helps you in so many different areas besides creating campaigns and stuff. Highly recommend AI just for your everyday use. Rather than Googling, maybe try to learn something through AI. I know, development and writing code is not my strongest suit, but I know enough to think critically and apply my research and come up with various different programs and scripts. And before it was all Googling and looking up different syntax or different ways people have done maybe similar stuff. You know, again, the audience, your boss, doesn't care necessarily how many times you searched Google or how many lines of code you have. It's more about how quickly did you get to the solution or the integration, or did you solve the problem. That's really more important. It's kind of like pride. If you're hung up about Google versus AI, the debate's very weak. Unless you're still going to the library and getting things out there. I mean, you can kind of roughly say they're close to one another. It's just a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more targeted information to what you're actually asking. So other things I ask, some things help me when I'm setting a setting, like how do the people dress, and there's just simple pictures of how people dressed, and I wanted to know how London looked back during this time period. So just 18th century London art and pictures. Here's a couple of different pictures that spit back out at me. It takes me to the Bing search here just to kind of look at them a little closer. So I get a little bit of inspiration of kind of how things looked before. I can explore things in different time or different areas of the city. Just kind of get that inspiration for our campaign. But that's all that did. So a lot of research here, and I'll probably go back into these as we kind of build this campaign out further. But this is what kind of has got me started. So I already got a couple ideas for factions. I already got a couple ideas for an antagonist. I got just a bunch of ideas, more than I had when I first got this. Because when I first got this idea for a campaign, I was like, "Oh no, that's difficult." But I feel way better about this. Um, so let's keep going from there, and we'll kind of go into the next topic, and that is how do we create a post-apocalyptic 18th century setting. Um, and you'll see some of the questions I asked to kind of help flesh out these ideas, at least to describe them and whatnot. Let me go ahead and do this. Post-apocalyptic 18th century. So I already asked a bunch of questions. I'll go ahead and point this out because I talked about it earlier. That's like you can only ask how many questions. So I'm at 16 of 30 questions already in this thread. So it's important to keep note of. But again, this is more, really, I consider this in the category of research. And yeah, we will start there now. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. So, all right. So, post-apocalyptic 18th century. Ask them some simple stuff, just sort of your own edification here. You know, because I want to make sure I create a campaign and not just an adventure. So, just really kind of elaborating that a little bit. Really, a campaign is just a series of different adventures. Um, so I asked AI. I said, "Hey, I'm creating a campaign set in a fictional 18th century setting, suffering from a post-apocalyptic event." I had a little AI problem here, so I guess I had to re-ask it, or why does it not show anything? But it was kind of either came back flat or Copilot had issues with responding. That happens, and to be honest, I didn't really offer it a whole lot of context. So maybe that's why I had to re-ask this. But essentially, I re-asked the question, giving it a lot more context. Also giving them some specifics on its output. You can kind of give it requests on, hey, I want bulleted information, or I want paraphrased information, or however you want the content sent back to you. So I basically kind of preemptively kind of put my concerns in with coming up with a post-apocalyptic or coming up with an apocalyptic scenario. So I said, I'm creating a campaign set in the fictional 18th century setting suffering from a post-apocalyptic event. With limited military advancements to cause massive destructions, give me a list of 20 ideas that could cause an apocalyptic event in this time period. The setting will be low magic with a heavy replacement of magic on pseudoscience or science-like things that create magic. I want to avoid a complete steampunk approach, but admittedly that may help create that may creatively help to explain some powers, military culture, way of living, stuff like that. So here's 20 ideas it spit back to me. It says you can have a massive volcanic eruption causing kind of like a worldwide volcanic winter. Plausible. Meteor impact. That sounds plausible. Plague outbreak. Failed alchemist experiment. Magnetic pole reversal. Solar flares. Crop failure. Earthquake. Tidal wave. Climate change. War of the elements. Mind control devices. Energy crystal overload. Time rift. Insect swarm, poison water supply, dark matter experiment, uh, psychic epidemic, mechanical uprising, dimensional breach. So these are all kind of science fictiony and natural elements. My favorite ones out of this, I don't think one fits one fits the bill across the board. But I think you could combine a couple of these that would explain it. So, like a war that's gone on way too long, followed by a plague outbreak, and crop failures, climate change, possibly. If I want something a little bit more whimsical, and I really wanted like one type of event, this is not completely ridiculous. An energy crystal overload, maybe. Back in the 18th century, they did think some crystals had different kinds of properties. They were used in different science experiments and stuff, like I believe in like the telescope and things like that. So they did explore crystals a little bit. Nothing to a nuclear reactor type of explosion, but you know, it's a fictional setting. We might have to stretch certain things to make a plausible apocalyptic world here in this time period. Um, right now, just looking at this list, I'm kind of leaning towards those things I just mentioned. I like the idea of like a field alchemy or a failed alchemical experiment. Maybe, uh, also in kind of relation to the climate change, or what was the other thing? Where was it? It had something to do with the temperatures and stuff. But anyways, like maybe there was an experiment to try to control temperatures. Dark matter was not really a. I don't believe they were familiar with what dark matter was in the 18th century, but they were kind of familiar with this, the science of ether. There was this concept of ether. That's how everything in the world kind of acted. Things, light, gravity, all that stuff kind of was manipulations and working through ether. So maybe ether is like our magic in our setting, rather than the traditional pulling your power from the different planes of existence and from deities. Maybe it's an expert knowledge of science and how to manipulate ether would explain some low magic capabilities. So there's a lot of uh, value there. Maybe we bring in some otherworldly entities. But I feel like we start getting outside of the low magic setting. Um, but it's your campaign. You're creating it, so you could do whatever you wish. This again, not to tell you how to create your campaign or what to write, not to write. I'm trying to fit with. I'm trying to work within the parameters my group gave me, just to kind of show that it's possible. But if you want to run a more magical thing, this might be a really nice way to go about it. You can still do this without bringing in otherworldly entities, but so that's I like that idea a lot. So that might be something I explore. Maybe there's this kind of science experiment went bad and was the reason for destruction of various parts of the world. Um, yeah, there's just you have to flesh these out, explore them. Then I kind of wanted like some speculations on what the world would look like from how governments, landscape, military changes, the impact of enlightenment, growth, culture, and social shifts. And it breaks it down. It kind of tells me what the appearance would look like: ruined cities, overgrown vegetation, stuff like that. Governments would move to more decentralized governments. Maybe bigger people like Britain would try to hold on to have a better chance at holding on to their more traditional monarchy. But other things like colonies and other governments that were not industrialized and stuff, maybe they become more fragmented, like warlords and that kind of take rise to power and fight others in the region for that same power and resources. Um, you know, there'll be stagnation in probably the research and the study, but then maybe there's a more pressing interest in keeping what research or what materials have been produced, literature, textbooks. Maybe that's a high focus for our setting because there's people that say, this is our history, this is everything we know and have learned over our centuries, as a society, and they're really focused on making sure they don't lose any of that knowledge. So, again, a good inspiration for a faction there. I'm almost positive I'm going to have a faction dedicated to this now the more I talk about it. So, then also there's how the shift in cultural society. Your traditional class structure would definitely break down. The high or higher upper class, middle class, and lower class, they're you know those start to become less valuable when you have a world in kind of disarray. I said give me another speculation. It kind of made an assumption in economic and trade transformations. Again, this is my fault, not AI's. I didn't really give it a lot of context here, so I really was looking for a whole new set of these. But after that kind of got generated, I was like, okay, it was still good information: barter systems, localized economies, guilds, and trade networks. I kind of asked some more stuff about what did 18th century England look like. Again, I'm kind of trying to get a gist of what the setting was pre whatever apocalypse, because then I can kind of create this upside down world that mirrors you know the former of the city. Also, at this point, as I was doing this research and kind of asking these questions, I'm pretty solid on the idea of my setting being London, England. It's got a lot of history, a lot of great historical, monuments, landmarks, buildings. Um, Really, just a wealth of inspiration there in such a historically rich city. Um, there's different things I could explore. I did not do this yet in AI, but what was England and Scotland and Ireland's relationship during the 18th century? And then possibly how would that change in this apocalyptic setting, just with Britain not being such a world power as much anymore? Perhaps Ireland has a stronger ability to fight for independence and not be part of England and all that. So just some again, just kind of brainstorming ideas based off the research, the context we're getting. So what would happen in major cities like London in the post-apocalypse? Kind of, I got a little bit of the same of the above, because the question is kind of weak. It's not a lot of context still. It's kind of generic still. It's very much so like my previous question. What would these cities be like in a? What was my previous exact question? Uh, yeah, give me five speculation on what the world would look like and stuff. So it's a very generic question. This is good up there, but when I asked it again, it's kind of, oops, I'm going all over the place. So it's just kind of giving me the same thing: resource scarcity, technological regression, cultural shifts. Um, so these things wasn't really helpful. I was like, okay, well, these seem obvious to me. I'm like, yeah, nothing's really surprising me here. There's gonna be survivor communities. You don't say. It's just kind of obvious. I don't think I need AI or any person to tell me those things are what would happen. Um, you know, Here's some more stuff. I try to get a little bit more elaborate, but again, I fell short of it. I was like, okay, well, what happened to London in the 18th century where war, disease, and natural disaster have caused a post-apocalyptic type event? Again, more stuff about fragmented communities, ruins, overgrowth wasn't very helpful. I'm like, well, how can I make this question helpful to really kind of explore what I'm really getting? And what I'm really trying to get to is what's different about a post-apocalyptic event for London and compared to other parts of the world. That's really what I'm trying to do. So I have some kind of some frame of reference on how to base cultures, ways of thinking, um, those things about this fictional setting we're coming up with. So the next thing I said was, "What about American cities during this time of disasters?" And they basically give me the same exact thing. Again, I'm striking out here, so but I'm getting to my. Well, you see, my thought is developing. I'm trying to do that kind of comparative analysis, so I can give a frame of reference, but not only inspire maybe faction ideas or world event ideas. So what I eventually got to uh, is this, and this was really helpful, I think. So I said, in a post-apocalyptic 18th century scenario, the impacts on cities like Boston, Paris, and London would vary based on their unique characters. Oh wait, that's not my question. That's the response. Sorry about that. Here's the question: How would the impact of cities differ from one another across the world in this post-disaster 18th century post-apocalyptic? Sorry, bad English, but I knew what I was trying to say. And then I said, let's compare Boston, Paris, and London. Those are three great examples of different parts of the world, but are not completely unrelated because there was a lot of history between America, France, and England during the 18th century. So, what remnants would be retained to or clung from the old world? How would culture, lives, and perspectives change in each city? So here it breaks it down. Like Boston, it talks about like how some of the old buildings might remain as symbols of the past. It talks about how the shipyards and docks could be repurposed for survival. Maintaining Boston's connection to the sea. I love that idea. Cultural changes, community focus. Talks about that. America's roots in Puritan work ethic and religious beliefs might see a resurgence focusing on more real practical skills rather than knowledge-based skills. Uh, Here it says like here a pragmatic approach to survival, focusing on practical skills and resourcefulness. But places like Harvard may become enclaves for preserved knowledge, striving to maintain enlightenment and ideals. I'm just real curious. So again, just starting another thread with AI, just ask the question: when was Harvard founded? Oh, so back in the 17th century. So yeah. Go back to the other thing here. All right. Whoops. Where were we? London has landmarks like Tower of London, whereas Paris has a lot of focus on artistic and literary traditions. Maybe they're going to be more of a focus on those things rather than military strength or former monarchy restoration. Uh, the monarchy might retain for London. It might retain some influence with the royal family becoming figureheads of hope and stability. There's class restructuring, stoicism, and adaptability, drawing on the history of resilience in the face of adversity. And here it kind of summarizes all of them, and this is really nice. This is, Boston would emphasize resilience, practical survival skills. Paris would focus on intellectual and artistic traditions. London would blend Stoicism with innovation, using its historical landmarks as fortresses and its scientific heritage to develop new survival technologies. So, the next thing I said was, in a low measure setting, give me some additional apocalyptic events that happened in the 18th century. For plausibility, it may be a series of bad world events that caused the apocalyptic scenario. 7 Years' War not ending, plus famine, social unrest, riots, that kind of stuff is what I asked. What else would be plausible cataclysmic events? Give me a lot of the same from earlier. Again, AI is not perfect. It takes a critical mind and thinking to kind of get what you need out of the content. So that kind of fell flat. So then I kind of started exploring. Since I knew it wasn't going to give me much more information, I wanted to explore some of these ideas like the energy crystal overload, dark matter experiment. You know, the I asked, would they even know of the dark matter? And this wasn't even created until 1933. The concept of dark matter, or the term, was coined. But here it kind of goes into maybe a pseudoscientific exploration of dark matter. Objects moving without apparent cause, strange gravitational effects, the ether theory. Now that was something that was widely accepted as the medium through which light and other forces traveled. Alchemical pursuits. Uh, they might actually create or uncover a substance with power properties similar to dark matter. Astronomical observations of celestial bodies changing in the sky. Philosophical speculation. They want to explore, understand the natural world. Maybe that's why they kind of went to these into these dark matter experiments. There could be ether manipulation devices that possibly in their science experience have chemical reactions, astronomical instruments, and something goes wrong with these experiments. So plausible, works in a fictional setting. Um, we gotta have to expand upon their powers, but or they're not powers, but their scientific capabilities. But again, it's fictional, and gonna have to stretch to make a post like man-made apocalyptic event. Let's see here. So here again, it kind of explains more. Uncontrolled energy release. They harness energy of dark matter for power or weaponry, and a catastrophe happens. Gravitational anomalies, dimensional breaches, so forth. I do like the psychic epidemic. I like this idea, possibly that a mass hysteria that's kind of led to the apocalypse too. Maybe there are some still hysterics or psychos that roam the wastelands of the world that exist from these initial cataclysmic events. Uh, Kind of gives you another source of tension or another antagonist group outside of your main antagonist that kind of keeps your party in check. Why don't we just go out, lead this place, and explore another world? Because there's crazies out there still that are they're still kind of living through this psychic epidemic. Uh, Not saying you should railroad or put walls around your characters, but just to make your landscape a little bit more threatening. It's not just bandits and would be opportunistic thieves. It could be people that have gone mad from experiments that were done years ago that are still just completely insane. Um, Also, ether was a big thing, so I was like, well, tell me more about ether, and it kind of breaks down that whole science of it. Again, more research, and I also asked, like, what type of experiments or scientific knowledge in 18th century would cause wide cataclysmic events. This one's about galvanism, electrical experiments, uh, you know, air pump and vacuum experience, chemical and alchemical reactions. I do like this one, where a failed experiment creates toxic gases or causes massive explosions that kind of pollute the air a little bit and really kind of hurt plant life, animal life. Really, then that coupled with an ongoing war that never ended, that could be a great thing. Perhaps it affects the climate a little bit, so we can use this for AI for inspiration and start to combine your ideas. So we got ether manipulation, cause spatial or temporal distortions in the world as we know it, causing again more chaos and more disruption. Let's see here. I think we're going to about to call it here for this first video here. Is really I wanted to showcase like how research is important to know what you're writing about, but also how to kind of expand upon that and take that information to create contextual or new AI prompts to ask new questions to iteratively kind of build through this and flesh these ideas out. One question gave me the exact answer I'm looking for, but each question gave me a piece or a breadcrumb, and I followed that to the next question that I had, and then so forth, on and on and on. I did ask about some of the 18th century stuff, like how is it used. It used about refraction. Some of the earlier scientists were using it for refraction, dispersion of light through crystals. Kind of led us to the understanding of optics. You know, Here's some cataclysmic events, kind of playing on that pseudoscience possibility. This is like a nuclear explosion from an energy amplification experiment. They were trying to work with crystals in the ether. And then, let's see here, it creates a resonance cascade disrupting the ether and causes spatial and temporal anomalies. So maybe, again, that explains why the anomalies happen. Uh, you know, Weather control, mind control, dimensional breach, all those things are really good inspiration points. So I think that's going to be a good stopping point for the first event. I'm probably going to take some notes, come up with some ideas on how I want to, come up with some ideas. Maybe choose my favorite post-apocalyptic event or series of events. And once I have that, I'll probably ask some questions about, fleshing out my world concept ideas. And I'll do a follow up on this and share all my research and how I used AI to come up with these answers. But again, this first video is just about research and context and how important it is to get good content out of AI. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you guys later.